What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson, coming at you with another Inside Pitt practice report with kickoff against Cincinnati, a little more than 48 hours away for the Pitt Panthers. So we're going to cap our week with three burning questions heading into the game day for the Pitt Panthers. And this is a big game for Pitt. This is a chance, like Pat Narduzzi said, to prove not just the strength of their own team against their first real test, their first Power Five opponent, but to also prove that the ACC has some teams in it, that it has some depth, that, after a weekend in week one where North Carolina made a statement against South Carolina and where Florida State made statements against LSU, this isn't exactly on the same level of national prestige, but that the Panthers are one of those teams that can represent their conference well and that their conference is both deep and good at the top. And the Panthers are going to help provide some of that depth for them. So, let's get into it. Let's start with this one, the one that we've talked about pretty much all week and that you've probably heard a lot about as well. But how does Pitt stand up to a bigger physical challenge? Literally a bigger physical challenge. This is not Wofford. This is not an FCS team. This is Cincinnati. This is a team that has been recruiting and playing at a Power Five level, even though they weren't in a Power Five conference for a long time. And especially this year, this is a Cincinnati team that is built around their defensive line. And their defensive line is something that we've heard from Pitt players and coaches about all week. They're confident. I mean, this is one of the bigger offensive lines that Pitt has had in a while. I think they average about 6'5" or 6'4" and about 320 pounds across the board. It's a big group, but we heard a lot at the same time about some holes in the offensive line, even against Wofford, and it came at concerning places. Pat Narduzzi identified early in the week and talked about it again on Thursday about pressure coming up the A and the B gaps, which is right in the interior of the line. It's those gaps in between the center and the guard, and then in between the guards and the tackles. Narduzzi said he doesn't mind pressure off the edges. That's something that's easy for Phil Jerkovic to avoid by stepping up in the pocket as long as the interior of the line stays clean. But if it's coming up the middle, that's much harder to avoid, and that really affects what Jerkovic and any quarterback really can do. And that's also where Dante Corleone is, that middle of the defense. He's their best defensive lineman. He's a 3-down nose tackle, and he's probably their best player as well. Pat Narduzzi said it was an emphasis this week to improve the blocking up front and to make sure that kind of pressure isn't coming through on the offensive line. But it's a fair question to wonder how much the loss of Ryan Jacoby affected them and where the Panthers are in figuring out his replacement. Jason Collier Jr. was in there at left guard for the Panthers in their last game. We'll see how he stacks up in this next game. Blake Suvovic, an experienced guy, also at right guard. He said that a lot of it was communication. So that kind of plays into the idea that there's some new guys there and that they still have some kinks to work out. But they don't have a ton of time to work out these kinks. They had a week of practice, but game reps really can't be simulated. So we'll see how the Panthers do once they step onto the field against a really challenging defensive line that's going to bring a ton of heat. That's something Zuvovic said, that they are going to pressure a lot. It's going to take not just the offensive line to, get their protections right, but Jerkovic make the right calls at the line, then just avoid the pressure when the snap comes and make sure the ball is delivered cleanly. It's a real team effort to deal with the defensive line that is this big and this physical and this fast and looks truly, like I said, the part of a Power 5 defensive line and front seven. Burning question number 2, does a top running back emerge? We've talked about this all week. It has been probably the biggest question on my mind is who takes the bulk of the carries for the Panthers this week? Because I think this is a week to trim down rotations. Pat Narduzzi said about the defensive line. They're going to trim it down a little bit. You're obviously going to trim down the amount of players you get in from a game like Wofford, a blowout where you are getting in, maybe even some 4-stringers, definitely some 3rd-stringers, and obviously some backups. But, I want to see someone emerge. I think it's the best move for them to have a workhorse back, to have one guy that they say, these are your reps. You can get hot like you need to, and we'll, figure things out from there. We want you. You are our best player to take the bulk of the snaps. So I'm not entirely sure who it'll be, quite honestly. If the smart betting man would put their money on Rodney Hammond, but I think Daniel Carter is a real player in this running back rotation, and then I think Sibo Flemister, also provides you some good hands out of the backfield, some speed as well to give you kind of a different look from Daniel Carter and Hammond, who are kind of more power backs. So I'm not really sure who's gonna emerge here. I suspect someone will, and then, we'll ask Pat Narduzzi about the game afterwards and say, "Yeah, this is our top guy, proved it in camp, proved it in practice, excuse me, and then went out in the game and made the most of his carries." But, pass protection is gonna be a big thing as well. You're running against a really talented defensive line, so how that works out is gonna matter as well. I think whoever separates himself in this game is really gonna separate themselves for the rest of the year, and that's a guy that you can count on to be their top rusher moving forward. And then our last burning question is, for me at least, is how real is this defensive secondary? They are going to get tested for the first time by what I think is a really talented quarterback and what the Panthers think is a very talented quarterback in Emory Jones, a guy who can do more than just throw the ball, but he can run as well. He's a really athletic scrambler, but also, he put up more than 500 yards, I think closer to 556 yards against Eastern Kentucky last week. This is a guy who can chuck it. He's creative. He can make things happen when he scrambles. He can throw on the run, and he's got some really talented receivers as well. A ton of speed. These are guys who transferred in from the ACC and the SEC from down south. They are guys who can really play, even as transfers who maybe took a step down. Some might think. So this secondary, you believe in the corners. But the safeties are a little bit of an open question. This secondary as a whole, particularly those new safeties, PJ and Javon McIntyre, they did not get tested against Wofford really at all. The defensive line was so dominant that the secondary didn't really need to do much, and that's perfectly fine. They didn't need to do a whole lot, but to this week, I think they are going to have to do a little bit more than they did in the past. This is going to be obviously a much bigger challenge, and they're going to have to really rise to the occasion. I'm obviously a Javon McIntyre believer. I think PJ O'Brien can be a good player as well. I think they have some depth with Stephon Hall and Donovan McMillan, but this is a quick ramp up. This is a schedule that you know the Panthers probably it's a schedule that gets more difficult as the season goes along, and this is kind of the first step in that. Wofford really, like I said, wasn't able to put the ball in the air at all, but we know Cincinnati will. So just how real is the secondary? Again, I'm a believer, but you got to see it actually get put together on the field. And I think, quite honestly, it's more likely that this secondary has to go through some growing pains before they get really better. I don't think that's uncommon. You think about especially the 2021 year or even just last year facing West Virginia in the opener. You learn a lot about yourself from week 1 to week 2. Just think about that West Virginia game last year, going from, giving up 30 points to a West Virginia team that you found out pretty quickly wasn't very good going down the stretch. And then you turn around the next week against Tennessee, who had one of, if not the best offenses, especially going through the air, their passing offense in the entire country, and you held them to, I believe, 27 points in regulation. That's pretty incredible on its own, but I think it also demonstrates that there is a lot going on in between week 1 and week 2 to make that a team makes improvements in. And the secondary is, I think, a team that you really need to count on if you're Pitt to make those adjustments on the fly and make them very quickly. So we'll see how that shakes out. That's one matchup, just those safeties against some of those hot receivers that the Bearcats have, and especially against Emory Jones's arm. Like I said, you got a lot of faith in the corners. Those are veteran guys who have been there, done that. But these new safeties, how do they react? How do they react to a team that is maybe going to throw some more wrinkles at them as well, and definitely be more athletic in week 2. So we'll see how those all shake out. Make sure to keep those in mind as you're watching the Panthers take on the Cincinnati Bearcats from Acrisure Stadium, whether you're in the stadium or you're watching from home. But I want to say thank you all for tuning into another Inside Pitt practice report. I'm headed out of here, but make sure you like this video and subscribe to us on YouTube. That's youtube.com/at Inside the Panthers, and find all of our reporting right from practices at the end of this week and game day at InsideThePanthers.com. Like I said, I'm Stephen Thompson. Thanks for tuning into another Inside Pitt practice report. I'll see you next time.